In 1861, the United States stood at the edge of collapse. For decades, the North and the South had grown into two opposing worlds, one driven by industry and free labor, the other sustained by slavery and state sovereignty. When Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, tensions reached their breaking point, and the nation began to fracture. Then, on April 12, 1861, the first cannon fire at Fort Sumter changed American history forever. A nation fractured. By the dawn of 1861, the United States was no longer a singular entity, but a precarious house divided against itself. To understand the shots fired at Fort Sumter, we must first examine the deep-seated socioeconomic fissures that had been widening for decades. The American North and South had evolved into two distinct elevations. The North was an industrial powerhouse fueled by free labor, technological innovation of a centralized federal government. Conversely, the South was a quintessential agrarian society. Its entire economic and social hierarchy built upon the peculiar institution of slavery. Throughout the 1850s, a series of fragile legislative compromises, such as the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850, began to disintegrate. The moral outrage sparked by the Fugitive Slave Act and the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin shifted the debate from economic policy to a fundamental moral reckoning. Tensions reached a fever pitch with Bleeding Kansas and the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision, which essentially stripped African Americans of any claim to citizenship. The political climate became so toxic that a peaceful resolution seemed increasingly impossible. The ultimate catalyst was the election of 1860. Abraham Lincoln, representing the newly formed Republican Party, campaigned on a platform that opposed the expansion of slavery. Although he did not seek to abolish slavery where it already existed, the South viewed his victory as a direct threat to their sovereignty. Within weeks of Lincoln's victory, South Carolina led a will of secession, arguing that the Union was a voluntary compact that could be legally dissolved. As if the state withdrew to form the Confederate States of America, the nation stood on the precipice of an abyss, waiting for a single spark to ignite the flames of war.
Chapter 2: The first shot at Fort Sumter. The flashpoint occurred in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Fort Sumter, a coastal fortification still under construction, had become a powerful symbol of federal authority in a state that claimed it no longer recognized that authority. Major Robert Anderson, commander of the small Union garrison, found himself isolated and desperately short of supplies. In early 1861, an attempt by President Buchanan to resupply the fort was met with Confederate gunfire, and on the side of the violence to come. When Lincoln took office, he faced an agonizing dilemma. If he evacuated the fort, he would surrender federal sovereignty. If he reinforced it, he could be accused of starting a war. Lincoln chose a middle path, notifying the governor of South Carolina that he would send provisions with no additional troops or weapons. The Confederate government, led by Jefferson Davis, viewed this as a hostile act. They issued an ultimatum: surrender the fort immediately or be fired upon. On April 12, 1861, at exactly 4:30 a.m., the heavy silence was shattered. A single model shell fired from Fort Johnson traced a luminous arc across the sky and exploded directly over Fort Sumter. This was a signal for every Confederate battery in the harbor to open fire. For 34 grueling hours, thousands of shells rained down on the masonry walls. The garrison, though exhausted and outgunned, managed to return fire, but their position grew untenable. The barrack caught fire, and the smoke became so thick that The men had to cover their face with wet cloth to breathe. Miraculously, no one was killed during the bombardment itself. However, the psychological and political impact was monumental. When Major Anderson finally agreed to evacuate, the American experiment had officially transitioned from a war of rhetoric to a total war of aggression. The point of no return had been crossed.
Chapter 3: Two Presidents, Two Ideologies. As the war began, the fate of the continent rests in the hands of two leaders who were, in many ways, mirror images of their respective societies. Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis both shared Kentucky roots, but their political philosophy were irreconcilable. Abraham Lincoln was a self-taught frontier lawyer who possessed a profound, almost mystical belief in the Union. In his first inaugural address, he pleaded the South, famously stating, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies." To Lincoln, the United States was a perpetual union, a democratic experiment that proved mankind could govern itself without a king. In contrast, Jefferson Davis was a West Point graduate and a former Secretary of War, who viewed the Union as a voluntary association of sovereign states. To Davis, the South was not rebelling, it was merely exercising its constitutional right to secede from a government that had failed to protect its property and rights. Their combat styles were as different as their philosophies. Davis was rigid and legalistic, often involving himself in the minute detail of military strategy. Lincoln, however, was an adaptive visionary strategist. He understood that this war was not about territory, but about better angel of our nature and the global survival of democracy. Both men faced immense pressure. Lincoln had to maintain a fragile conciliation of abolitionists and conservative unionists, while Davis struggled to build a centralized government for a confederacy that had been fundamentally built on the idea of decentralization. The ideological chasm between Lincoln's vision of a unified nation and Davis' vision of a decentralized confederacy would define the moral and political boundaries of the struggle for the next 4 years.
Chapter 4: The Sinews of War, Modernity and Logistics. The American Civil War was the first industrial war, a massive collision of technology, logistics, and production. While the soldier bravery was equal on both sides, the North entered the conflict with a staggering industrial advantage. The Unions possessed 90% of the nation's manufacturing capacity and more than twice the railroad mileage of the South. This war saw the birth of modern military communication. The telegraph functioned as the nervous system of the Union Army. Lincoln spent countless hours in the War Department telegraph office, receiving real-time updates and sending direct orders to his general in a few levels of command and control previously unimaginable in human history. Technology also revolutionized the lethality of the battlefield. The introduction of the rifle muskets and the miniature bow increased the range and accuracy of infantry fire fivefold. This trend turned traditional Napoleonic tactics, where soldiers marched in tight formation, into suicide missions on the water. The era of wooden sailing ships and the overnight, with the deal between the ironclads used as monitor and sea as Virginia, the floating fortresses of iron and steam signal a new age of naval warfare that would influence global military strategy for decades. Logistically, the Union Anaconda Plan sought to leverage its naval superiority to strengthen the Confederate economy by blockading southern ports and seizing control of the Mississippi River. The North aimed to deprive the South of its pink cotton, ribbon, and its ability to import essential war material. Ultimately, the Civil War was won not just by generals, but by the ability to sustain a long-term industrial effort. The Union's capacity to feed, clothe, and arm millions of men eventually overwhelmed the Confederacy's agrarian economy, proving that in modern warfare, the victory was as potent as the cannon.
Chapter 5 A New Birth of Freedom Legacies and Meaning. The short fire at Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861 ignited a firestorm that would burn for 4 long years. By the time the smoke finally cleared at Appomattox, over 6,000 Americans had been perished, more than in all other American wars combined up to that point. However, the war was not merely a record of carnage, it was a profound transformation of the American identities. Through the passage of the 13th Amendment, the particular institution of slavery was finally abolished. The nation had been purged by fire, moving closer to its founding promise that all men are created equal. The post-war amendment, the 14th and 15th, reidentified the citizenship and voting rights, laying the legal groundwork for the future civil rights movement. The war proved that the federal government had the authorities and the responsibility to protect the rights of all citizens against the encroachment of the state tyranny. Linguistically and psychologically, the war changed how Americans viewed the countries. Before 1861, people said the United States are a great place. After 1865, they said the United States is a great place. The plural became singular. The collection state became an unifying nation. Today, the echoes of Cannon at Sumter serve as a somber reminder that democracy is a fragile inheritance. It requires a commitment to a dialogue, a respect for the rule of law, a constant striving toward what Lincoln called a more perfect union. The American Civil War remained the most defining chapters in the nation's history, a journey through the darkness of division toward the light of the new birth of freedom for all people. This is the legacies we carry forward into the future.